So my name is Alister Chapman. I'm a freelance DP cinematographer from near London. You probably recognise I have a slightly strange accent. And we have zebras, not zebras. What am I going to talk about today? Well, lots of things. First of all, I don't work for Sony. I shoot all kinds of things, extreme weather, drama, documentaries, lots and lots of stuff. That's enough about me. Let's get on to the shoot. So I've been lucky enough to be shooting with Venice lately, and a project that I've been working on is for a major TV manufacturer to show off how good their TVs are. And no, it's not Sony. And I got the opportunity to shoot this on Venice. The brief for the project was to create two films, a 2 to 3 minute long wow film, where every single shot is a shot where hopefully the viewer will go, wow, and then a diary behind the scenes sort of thing of the adventure. We actually have people, they can win a competition to come out on these shoots with us. And the final output, 60p UHD HDR10 video, so it's HDR. For various reasons, we do it at 60p, but the footage is often shown at 30p within a 60p clip, because that allows us to control the cadence, the motion on the TV. I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but modern TVs use motion smoothing, so your nice 24 frames per second film cadence just disappears because the TV gets rid of it. But if you make the file a 60p file, that disables that, and you can get your motion cadence back. You can control the way your pictures look. Image quality is everything for this project. Challenges that we were going to encounter were shooting at night, low light, Vegas, bright lights as well, so big dynamic range, and in a slot canyon. And I don't know how many of you know what a slot canyon is, but it is a very deep, very narrow canyon. And in the slot canyons, in most of the day, at the bottom of the slot canyon, they're so deep, it's dark. It's like the middle of the night dark. But then for a few minutes, and it is about a 15-minute window in this particular place that we went to, at midday, as the sun comes right over the top of the canyon, the sun comes down, creating these incredible laser-like beams of light into the canyon. So again, low light, high dynamic range was going to be very challenging to do this shoot. So I was lucky enough to be able to shoot on Venice. Now, let me say something here, a little bit of a story. I own Sony F5. I shoot on Sony's F5 and 55 a lot. That is what my clients normally expect. I shoot 16-bit RAW. Looks absolutely amazing. For this shoot, I had the opportunity to shoot on Venice, so I took it. In some respects, I wish I hadn't, because now the client has seen the footage, they're expecting this on every single shoot that I do. And they did see the difference. They did see it was better. And they're now saying, we want Venice. And I'm having to say, well, yeah, but that means it's going to cost you a little bit more because this camera is that little bit more expensive. And now we're just in a big negotiating battle trying to put rates up, which most of you will probably know is not that easy. Venice, what's Venice all about? I'm not going to spend too much time on this. Full frame, very big color space, amazing color reproduction, 8-stop ND filter, is a really nice feature. And all of this information here you can get online, so I'm not going to bore you to death with too much of it, but big color space, ND filters built in, raw XOCN, which I'll talk about in a minute, lots of great stuff. The sensor is a brand new design sensor specifically made for Venice, cost an awful lot of money to design, and it's full frame, and it's designed to work for video applications. It has virtually no rolling shutter. Now, it wouldn't be true to call it a global shutter. It's a different technology, but the effect is the same. There's no image skew or any of those problems normally associated with a rolling shutter. We have this amazing 8-stop ND filter in it. And for me, as a filmmaker, this is a wonderful thing. Now, I also use Sony's FS5 and the FS7 with the variable ND filter. This isn't variable, but it's one-stop steps. But what it does mean is it actually changes the way you shoot, because your ND filter becomes your depth of field, your sort of coarse exposure control, allowing you to actually set the exact depth of field that you want with your aperture, and then just bring in the right amount of ND to get the exposure you want. You're never more than half a stop away from that sort of optimum depth of field, and that does change the way you shoot. And another thing it allows you to do, which when you're shooting at 6K and things like that, is the ability to just quickly stick in 8 stops of ND, maximum ND, check your focus with the aperture wide open, shallowest depth of field, focus is most critical. Once you've got your focus right, you just take the ND back out again and you carry on shooting. So it's a really quick way for checking exposure. Now, something else that it allows you to do is to actually rate the camera at different sensitivities, because effectively the sensor plus ND together determine the camera's sensitivity. So you can have the camera set at its base ISO of 500 ISO, bring in a stop of ND, and effectively then the camera becomes a 250 ISO camera. And then you can add external NDs or compensate from there. So it gives you great flexibility over how you shoot. The sensor has some amazing capabilities. This is all of the different frame rates that it will be able to do. In fact, some of these numbers that are in red have changed slightly from any previous versions that you might have seen of this. And there's actually a few more pixels now in the 6K modes, as Sony are eking out every last bit of quality that they can out of this sensor. For my particular production, we shot in both 4K 17:9 at 60 frames per second primarily, and also we did some 6K 24 frames per second as well. We were using the Sigma full frame primes, our main lenses, and when you go to that full frame mode and you shoot with a really good quality lens, the quality of the images that you get are absolutely amazing. Now, this projector here, I think is only HD or 2K. So this is standard dynamic range, full frame, 20mm Sigma prime. The projector, unfortunately, in this theatre is a very nice projector, but it can't do this full credit. It's not, doesn't have the resolution. But in HDR, this water just shimmers beautifully. These images are really something that do take your breath away. So what frame rates are planned? Now, this is a big question a lot of people have. So we primarily shot at 60 frames per second in 4K and 24 frames per second in 6K. But everyone's saying, yo, Sony have got all these cameras like the F55 that can do high frame rates. What is Venice going to do? So this isn't set in stone just yet, but this is what Sony are aiming for. So what is being aimed at is 60 frames per second in 6K. 90 frames per second in 4K and 120 frames per second in 2K. So that's going to give you some really nice overcranking ability and things like that. And the really great news is this is with the existing sensor. So you're not going to need to get a different sensor to go to these higher frame rates. And it's going to be introduced fairly quickly. It'll be licensed, similar to the anamorphic licenses and the way those work, and expected within a year. Now, if you do a little bit, if you work with Sony, you sort of think about this, they've already said that version 3 firmware will come out in February of next year, and this will probably be in version 4, and it's normally about 3 months between each firmware update, something like that. So we're looking at February, March, April, May, June, and there is a big trade show that happens every June, incidentally. So perhaps we'll have some news on this and actually be able to shoot with this by this time next year. Operating the camera. Venice is a delight to use. I have to say, it's a real pleasure to work with this camera because it's really simple. On the operator side, we have a small OLED screen. And from that screen, we can scroll up and down with the menu wheel. We can change our ND filters. We can change the exposure index, white balance, and the white balance steps are tiny, so you can go to almost any white balance that you want very easily. Really simple, fast, easy way to work. If you need to change anything in more depth on the camera, then you go to the other side of the camera where we have this nice screen on the other side of the camera, on the AC side, the assistant cameraman side, and a really nice brand new designed menu system. They brought in an industrial design engineer to do this. It's only 3 levels deep. It's very intuitive. If I want to change my project settings, most of them are on the first page. If I need to do anything a bit more sophisticated, like maybe change the ISO, I just go to the project details page and it will be in there. It's fast, it's quick, it's efficient. It is not like a lot of other Sony cameras. I'm allowed to say things like that. Anamorphic 4K, I have to be honest here, I haven't shot a lot of anamorphic 4K with the camera. We've done some test shoots with it. I haven't done a job for a client yet. I hope to very soon because it's really exciting what it can do. I'm really looking forward to trying anamorphic out. But of course, the Venice's big thing is its latitude and its dynamic range. It has an amazing dynamic range. I'm quite used to shooting with a 14-stop camera, and that's a lot of dynamic range. But the big thing about Venice is not so much the range, which is that bit bigger, but the way the ends of the range behave, those really bright highlights that are right at the edge of what the sensor can do, and the really dark shadows at the bottom. There is something very, very pleasing, and I hope you'll see this in the clips when we show the video, about the way it rolls off at the top and rolls off at the bottom. And another thing about Venice is as you change the exposure, the color remains remarkably constant. There are no color shifts, no hue change or anything, all the way from the deepest, darkest shadow all the way to the brightest highlight where it clips. The color reproduction is gorgeous. There's loads of colors in the shadows. This slot canyon that we shot in, the images are a bit misleading. It's incredibly dark. Now, I was lucky enough to be able to shoot with the dual ISO mode in Venice, a beta software of it, and some people aren't really sure what dual ISO means. It does mean that the camera has two different base sensitivities, and the key thing about it is that the dynamic range at both of these sensitivities is identical. Now, in a traditional camera, this is a circuit of the way a traditional camera, or most cameras work. Light falls on a pixel, it's passed to an analog to digital converter, converted to a digital signal. And in a traditional modern video camera, if we add gain, it's all done after the analog to digital converter. And at that point, our noise and our dynamic range has already been determined. So if we add any gain, the noise increases. Yes, the picture gets brighter, but the noise also increases, and we actually lose a bit of dynamic range. But what Sony are doing is they are doing a process here between the pixel and that analog to digital converter where they add some gain and some other Sony magic that amplifies the signal in there. And then they adjust the analog to digital converter to match. And that gives you the ability to have two different sensitivities with the same dynamic range in both cases, and only a tiny difference in the noise. There is a little bit more noise. It wouldn't be fair to say it's the same. And that noise actually at 2,500 ISO is really nice. It looks very filmic. It's not a fixed pattern noise. It's very fine. It's different in every single frame. I really like the way it looks. And I'm somebody that doesn't normally like noise at all. So you can see here, we've got the shot done during the daytime of the Native American Navajo dancer, 500 ISO, shot done at night, Fremont Street in Vegas, 2,500 ISO. And in terms of noise, there's almost no difference between them, a little bit more in the lower one. In terms of dynamic range, exactly the same. In terms of color response, exactly the same. And that really does make life a lot easier. So this is, I actually measured this with a spot meter in the bottom of the slot canyon. And so really I was exposing for this highlight on the rock here. You'll see this clip in the video. And that was about 5 stops above my midpoint. And we were going down to a measurable 6 below. I couldn't measure below that. It's so dark down there. And so in this scene alone, we actually have more, I think, in total from the darkest shadows to the brightest highlights than 15 stops. More actually than Venice can handle. But what is really nice, and this is a frame grab, is if you do look at those very bright highlights where right at the back where it's +6 or more, is they don't just clip, they roll off. And this is the thing that is different about Venice to other cameras. And it makes it look very natural even when it's overexposing. Here's another 2,500 ISO shot. No problem with the highlights. And what's amazing about these shots is we've got the little light bulbs on the left-hand side. If you go into post-production and bring the exposure down, you can see the filaments inside the light bulbs. I've not seen that on any camera before. It's really quite something. Now, rating Sony's Venice, now people that know me and maybe read some of the stuff I've written will know that for most of the Sony cameras, I prefer to rate them at an ISO or an exposure index lower than the Sony level. So in the case of an FS5, which is 2,000 ISO, I like to rate it at 800 to 1000 ISO to deliberately overexpose it to overcome some of the noise that that camera produces. With Venice, there is absolutely no need to do that. You can shoot at 500 ISO, 500 EI, and you will get a beautiful, clean, noise-free picture. And in fact, I wouldn't be uncomfortable rating the 500 base ISO at 1000 EI. To give me a bit more overexposure headroom. It's that clean. When you shoot at 2500 ISO, at the 2500 base ISO, there's a little bit more noise, and I chose for this shoot to shoot at 1600 EI for the really dark scenes to keep them nice and clean. But now I've graded it and gone through it and everything else, I'm not sure that that was actually necessary to do. So if it's a very, very dark scene, I might use 1600 EI, but for most, I probably would just shoot it at 2500. Light meter and camera were always in near perfect agreement, which is, again, is really refreshing. That it just meant I had the confidence to go out there and use my light meter, and every time was getting the perfect exposure just by setting the light meter to what it should be. Now, using the ND filters here, we can get all kinds of different ISOs. I was asked to show you this slide because a lot of people like to shoot at 800 ISO. It's a nice ISO similar to other cameras. And we can use the ND filters to do this by setting the camera to 2500 ISO base and then bringing in some ND and shooting at 1600 EI. And then we can get 800 effective sensitivity for the camera as a camera system, so sensor plus ND filter. So it gives us the ability to really pick and choose our ISOs. So campfire scene. This scene was shot obviously at night. You can see that from the pictures. Most of the light on the faces of our cast is all coming from the campfire. It's all being lit by the campfire. Again, we'll see this in the film. But we did use a light and motion stellar just to throw a bit of light into the background. I think you'll see it better in the video. There's some scrub just behind where the guys are sitting. And without that bit of light, it was just a black nothingness. Throwing a bit of light in there with the light just sort of helped lift the background, make it a more interesting scene to look at, more interesting thing to view. Viewfinder. Well, the viewfinder has also changed now. We have a new DVF EL200 viewfinder, and this is a really nice viewfinder, the one that the F55 camera has, getting a bit long in the tooth technology-wise now. So this is new technology, much higher resolution panel, 1920 by 1080, specifically designed for Venice, and now all the information about your exposure and everything else is around the outside of the picture as opposed to obscuring the image. Much better diopter adjustment. My eyes aren't as good as they used to be, so it's really nice to have that. And in the next firmware release, lots of assignable buttons and functions that you'll be able to assign to the viewfinder. Okay, so XOCN. Let's look at the workflow. So that was all shot with XOCN. XOCN is Sony's extended tonal range original camera negative. What a wonderful mouthful that is. It is basically a way to take the data off the sensor, which is obviously a very big amount of data, directly off that sensor, make it much, much smaller to be able to be recorded, retaining all of the captured picture information, or certainly as much as possible, and in a file that's really easy to work with. And I think this is something that a lot of people don't get about XOCN, is this stuff's really easy to deal with. So we're looking at some very small file sizes. If we look at this slide here, we will see that XOCN is, in most cases, smaller than ProRes. Yet we're capturing or recording that full sensor data in 16-bit linear. And the flexibility that that gives you in post-production is absolutely phenomenal. And once you start shooting this, going back to something like ProRes or a traditional codec actually seems really clunky, because this is small, it's fast. I can actually edit the 4K XOCN on my laptop. I don't need a huge workstation. Obviously, it's much nicer and faster with a big workstation, but it's quite manageable on a laptop. And if you're shooting on location, on the road, next week, I will have 2 weeks shooting storms and tornadoes on the road with Venice. We have to do our backups on the road. The fact that the files are small makes that so much easier and so much quicker. So XOCN is absolutely amazing. And I did a workshop recently, and we decided to have a look at how amazing it is. So what we did was we shot this tree, busy picture, lots of details, lots of textures, and this is the 4096 by 2160 Sony RAW. So this is the best quality that Sony Venice can capture. It's a 4K file, and we're going to look at one very small part of it right up in the corner there and see what that looks like. So we shot in RAW, we shot with XOCN ST, which is the standard quality, and also LT, which is the very, very small light version. And if we look at the XOCN ST on the left, blown up 400%, next to the XOCN LT on the right, can you see a difference? I can't. In fact, when we were doing these tests, we were looking at the monitor and actually getting quite confused ourselves as to which was which. The difference is tiny, if you can find it. And the difference that you get, actually, the way this codec works is it doesn't introduce artifacts as such. If the image can't be compressed or recorded properly, it reduces the resolution very, very slightly. It softens it just the tiniest of bits in certain areas. Most of the time, you can't see that that's happening. You can't see it. You certainly don't get any nasty artifacts. But the amazing thing is when we look at the RAW compared to the XOCN LT, so this is the smallest version of XOCN, it's almost impossible to find a difference. There are differences. The RAW is better, but this difference is so small that if I had to shoot with LT, maybe I was short of media or something like that, I really wouldn't be worried about it. Perfectly happy to shoot with LT, although obviously I would normally shoot with the ST. And of course, if you've got a nice small codec, your recording time is really good, even on relatively small cards. So on a 512 gigabyte card, we can get with ST 24 frames per second, 4K an hour. With LT, 100 minutes. Those are really good recording times, considering the quality that we're getting. So our workflow is quite simple, actually. You copy the AXS cards to 3 hard drives, so there's 3 copies of everything, using my MacBook. The files then spot checked using Sony's RAW Viewer, which is a free application from Sony, just to make sure there are no problems, nothing we're unaware of going on in there. And then editing using Adobe Premiere. XOCN plays back directly in Adobe Premiere without any problems. It's converted to 709 when you do that. And then take an XML file from Premiere into DaVinci Resolve and grading using ACES CC. ACES works really well with Venice footage because ACES under the hood is linear, and of course because the XOCN is linear as well, there's almost a seamless transformation into Resolve. A couple of things, if you do use Resolve with XOCN, and especially if you use the 6K footage, is the ACES input transform once upon a time had to be set to Sony RAW, but now you set it to none. You have no input transform for XOCN or Sony RAW. Set it to none. And then the decoder that you need to use, you go to the RAW options page and you go to the Sony RAW page. You should use the Sony RAW decoder, not the Blackmagic one. The Blackmagic one is fast, it's quick, and it's easy, and maybe you'll use that one for doing your grading and for just as for previewing your files. But when you come to your final output, choose the Sony RAW one. The quality is much nicer, much better, and that will give you the very best results. And because XOCN is very lightweight in terms of processing power, typically I'm getting real-time processing even with 2 or 3 nodes of effects and grades on my workstation. It's really easy to deal with. We didn't use this, but you do have the ability to record a proxy alongside the RAW or XOCN files in the camera on an S/S card, and that can be MPEG HD. Version 2 firmware, you'll have the ability to do HD ProRes as a proxy with the same file name as the RAW, so you have a proxy workflow instantly without having to actually create proxies. The camera will produce them on the fly. Now, another thing that's coming in version 2, and this is what I will be testing in the next couple of weeks, is the ability to shoot using E-mount. So the PL mount on the front of the camera comes off, and underneath that, there is a Sony E-mount. And Sony E-mount has a very, very shallow flange back, so the distance between the mount and the sensor is very short. And that allows you to adapt to all kinds of other different lenses. So you can put almost any lens that you want on this camera. And being a full-frame sensor, that opens up all sorts of possibilities with stills lenses. And I'm going to be trying some of Sony's E-mount lenses, their own lenses on there, the G Master lenses, but also some prime lenses from other manufacturers, just to see how E-mount works with full frame 6K shooting. I'm really quite excited to try that out. I think it's going to be really interesting. And it's one of the things that's going to make owning this camera, if you want to own it yourself as opposed to renting it, much more affordable, because you're not going to have to buy the most expensive full frame cinema lenses. You will be able to put high quality DSLR lenses like the Sony G-series lenses on there and get really good results on much lower budgets than would perhaps normally be possible. All sorts of things coming, like anamorphic adapters and things like that will work with E-mount lenses. So it really does open up lots of possibilities. Another version 2 feature that's coming is ProRes recording on the S/S cards. And you'll be able to record ProRes as well as the 4K. If you are shooting XAVC and you use Venice, I really recommend the Class 480 recording. This is a higher quality version of XAVC. It's really nice to work with, but you will also have the option for ProRes as well, making it even more convenient. You're also going to get the ability to add more LUTs on the output. And in fact, you can have more than one LUT. You can have 2 different LUTs in the camera on different SDIs, one in the viewfinder, one on the SDI, things like that. So you might have one in the viewfinder for exposure, to get the exposure right. And then you might have your creative look on the SDI, so the client monitor can show what the finished output should be. So that's a really nice thing. Surround view. So if you're shooting in 4K 17:9 because you're not using the whole full frame sensor, in the viewfinder you'll be able to have a surround view so you can see what's going on just outside of frame. It's not recorded, but it means that if you're doing a pan, you can tell when something that you might not want in that shot is about to approach into the frame and stop your pan before it encroaches into the image. So this is going to be another nice version 2 feature. Dot-by-dot magnification. Currently with the viewfinder, the focus mag is a digital focus mag. It's okay, it's not ideal, but you'll have a dot-by-dot up to 4 times pixel-to-pixel magnification. That will make focusing much easier. High and low key function. If you've never used this function before, it's one of the Sony's best kept secrets. So on the F5, F55, those cameras, F65, you have it already in those cameras. And what it does is when you're shooting is it offsets the LUT. First of all, it brings the LUT down so that what it does is it allows you to then look into the highlights more. So you can see what's going on in the extremes of your exposure in the highlights. You press the button again, and it then brightens the image up so you can see what's going on in the shadows. When you have a 15-stop camera, there's no way a conventional standard dynamic range viewfinder can show you everything that you're shooting. So being able to break that down into the high, middle, and low range really helps you see what's going on at the extremes of your exposure. So this is going to be a really key feature. And also false color in the viewfinder. A really nice thing that's coming for larger productions is the ability to plug in a network cable into the camera's network port, and then have that connected through a router, perhaps to multiple Venice cameras on say a live shoot or a studio shoot, and then control them from a device with a browser. And you'll get a screen like this and a series of screens that essentially mimics the side panel, the AC side, the assistant cameraman side panel, and you can control the camera, change all your settings remotely. You don't have to go and access each individual camera. So that will make things a lot easier. And then in version 3, that will go wireless. So using Wi-Fi, you'll be able to use your smartphones, your iPads and things like that to actually control the camera remotely. And on the F65 camera, the remote control function is actually really nice. And I'm sure this will get expanded as time goes on with other features and functions. So it's, again, a really great thing to have. I have to say that the Venice camera really, when it came out, I've shot on F65, and that's a great camera. I love the pictures that camera produces. And when the Venice first came out, it kind of struck me as being the small brother of the F65. The F65 was still that flagship camera, and Venice was its little brother. But I actually think personally that Venice is actually the better camera. It's more versatile in what it can do. The image quality is just stunning. The dynamic range is amazing. It's very simple to use. And this is one of the great things about this camera, is it's so simple. A lot of people, I mean, how many of you, hands up, use Sony cameras? most of you, almost all of you, they're not always the simplest of cameras to use. This one, you turn it on, you point it at the subject, you set your aperture for the exposure, and you press the record button. That's about all you can do with this camera. And because the viewfinder is very accurate, getting that exposure just right is easy. It matches my light meter, so getting that just right is easy. It's so simple. And it just means that as a cinematographer, as a filmmaker, I can concentrate on my lighting. I can concentrate on making the image look nice, my framing and composition, all of those things, because I'm not worried about, have I got this goddamn camera set the right way? Because with Venice, there is only effectively one way, which is the RAW or the XOCN. There isn't a complex menu with all of these functions that you might only ever use once in a million years. It does what a cinema camera should do, which is take beautiful pictures simply, quickly, and easily with very low noise. So there you have it. I've actually gone through this quite a lot faster than I was anticipating. So that does mean that I do have a little bit of time for questions and answers. And having shot now, I've done 2 commercial shoots with Venice and a lot of test shots with Venice. I can hopefully answer any questions that you have about what it's like to use and how it is to go. So do we have any questions about Sony's Venice? Yes, sir. Do I have my own personal LUTs in there? At the moment, no, you can't load your own personal LUTs in there right now, but you will be able to. So from version 2 onwards, you'll be able to load your own LUTs into the camera, and then you can have a creative look on one SDI, perhaps your own personal LUT, and then you can have the built-in LUTs on the viewfinder, perhaps for exposure. That whole LUT system on this camera is going to be very, very flexible and very versatile, but it's not there yet, version 2. And version 2 is expected to come out in July, so this is not far away now. Originally, it was forecast for August, but they're going to bring it out early, which is great news for everybody. So any more questions? Yes, sir.
So the XOCN
Kodak,
is that like a raw light, like Apple's new ProRes or?
It shares a lot of similarities with Apple's new ProRes RAW. It is taking the data from the sensor and recording that in a file that is much smaller than it would be normally. Now, one of the things about RAW is that RAW is inherently quite efficient anyway. So with a traditional video camera, you take the data off the sensor, which is in a single chip sensor, it's Bayer picture information, so you have red, green, and blue pixels. That's converted then into a color picture, YRGB, so you have 4K of Y, 4K of G, 4K of B, so you have this big fat signal. But when you shoot with RAW, you don't convert it into component video or RGB. You leave it as just the RAW. So in the case of 4K, it is a single set of 4K data. You turn it into that big fat color picture in the computer later on. So the RAW is already 3 times more efficient than conventional recording because you keep that raw data as opposed to expanding it into a color picture. Then we add various algorithms and processes after that to make it a smaller file. But in doing that, we still retain 16-bit data as it would have been on the sensor. And one of the things about RAW is, and RAW XOCN, they behave virtually identically, is that with my F5 camera shooting on the R5 with the compressed RAW that has, I've been able to go back. I've had that camera 5 years now. I've been able to go back to footage I shot when I first got that camera and regrade it using the newer tools, newer LUTs, newer everything else. And that footage looks so much better than it did 5 years ago because you can apply new processes, new techniques, better noise reduction, better lookup tables, better color science to that data because it's the sensor data. So maybe with Venice in a couple of years' time, new processes will come out that will allow you to process the material more efficiently and better, and your footage will actually get better as time goes by being able to go back to that original data and start again. Once you've converted your material into YRGB or RGB, a lot of that you've baked in a lot of stuff that you can't then unpick. But having that 16-bit sensor data is just wonderful. Yes, sir?
Does the camera use the same SBIS media cards as the F55, or does it have a new
No, so the S/S cards are exactly the same as the F55. So there's no change there in those cards. It's the same media as you would use with that. It's the only, for the RAW though, you want the R7 recorder on the back, and then that's XOCN onto AXS cards, which is a different type of media. But in terms of cost per minute of storage, it's actually, the cards are quite expensive, but because you get so much more on them, because they're bigger cards and the RAW is so efficient, it's not that much more expensive to shoot on the XOCN than it is to shoot on the S/S with log. Now, when I bought my F5 and R5, I had to make a choice. I could have, at that time, have afforded an F55 and recorded log on S/S, or I could buy an F5 with the R5 and record RAW on the AXS cards. And I went for the 5 and the RAW because I knew that having 16-bit data would give me so much more grading flexibility and scope later on. And if I had to go back and make that decision again, I would make exactly the same choice, because that 16-bit footage is just amazing to work with. It's just, there's huge amounts of information in there. I mean, the highlights in 16-bit linear, the brightest stop has more information than the rest of your entire exposure. And what that then means is that when you do approach that limits of exposure, those highlights that are just about to overexpose or whatever, there is so much picture information up there that even though it might at first glance look overexposed, it's very often recoverable, which you don't get the same flexibility with log, because that top stop doesn't have that much information with log. So I really would, linear data, linear recording is really fantastic, especially for bright scenes. Any more questions? Yes, sir.
Why doesn't this camera utilize Sony's kind of lauded electronic ND filters?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So why doesn't this have the variable ND filter that we see in some of the other cameras? Officially, I don't know, but my understanding is that it's actually very, very difficult to make a variable ND big enough to cover the full frame sensor that would be of a high enough quality to be acceptable for movie production. Super 35, it's a smaller sensor, smaller ND filters required. Also at that sort of level, FS7 level, perhaps people are a little bit less picky. There might be a tiny color shift or something, which wouldn't be acceptable in a camera at this level. So my understanding is it's purely a quality issue of getting that big ND filter to cover the whole sensor. Any more questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah. Going back to the slot canyon shoot.
Yeah.
Just to get an idea of what it's like working with this, because it's a fairly large camera. What kind? I mean, did you have much of a crew? Did you have a first AC with you?
Nope.
What were you just?
I'm the crew. No, it was me and a tripod, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, okay, so let's be accurate here. So I was part of a larger crew. We had a photographer taking photographs. We had a producer, a director, and various people running around. But I was the only person shooting video. Now, obviously, if we needed to move kit from A to B, everybody helped everybody else. So, we all helped. But I think there was a picture somewhere in the presentation, I think there was that picture of me carrying the kit across the desert to the slot canyon. This is how we got there. It's about a mile walk across the desert. So I've got cameras in the bag over my right shoulder with a couple of batteries, the rucksack on my back, I had some filters, and then the tripod, and that's basically the whole kit there. And one of the nice things about VENICE is a 12 or 24 volt camera. You can run it off 12 volts or 24 volts. You don't need to switch anything, it sorts itself out. It gives you 12 volts on its auxiliary ports for your accessories, even if you power it on 24 volts, but it's also really low power. So I was using some 150 watt-hour batteries. A single 150 watt-hour batteries will give me a couple of hours of operation non-stop. Now, if I shoot with an Alexa or something like that, I can't do that. I'm going to need 3 times the batteries. I think it's about 60 watts in total. It's not a high-power camera, maybe a bit more than that. But yes, it's more than an F55 and more than some of those cameras, but it's not a high-power camera at all. It's very low on power. It is quite heavy. It's what I like to think of it as being reassuringly dense. Because it's not a big camera. It's not much bigger than an f55, which is a little bit deceptive because if you've used an f55 and then you look at the Venice, you think, oh, it's not going to be that much heavier, but it is. But it's still a lot lighter than most of the competition. It's quite easy, quite a manageable weight, but it's surprisingly heavy for its size, and that's down to the way it's been built. It's built like a tank, so it's that kind of camera that you can work with. I'm not saying you should, but if you drop it, there's a fairly good chance it's going to survive. You know, it happens. Accidents happen, and Venice is really nicely put together. And of course, you have the ability now to be able to remove the sensor and the whole block off the front and connect the sensor block via a cable to the body. So there's a remote head option now. It's just been announced here at this show. It's just such a versatile camera. It can do so many things now. Yes?
Is that swapping the front end done, is that in the field or on the bench?
Right, so one of the things, Venice was built to be able to swap the sensor. So in the future, there is likelihood, I don't know what's coming to be, maybe a dedicated high-speed sensor to go even faster than this sensor can do now. There might be a low-light sensor. There might be all sorts of options. You can remove the front of the camera. The whole front end of the camera comes off. Let me see. I think you can you get an idea of the way it breaks down here. So from here through to actually here, this with the sensor, the ND filters, the lens mount is one module, and that is a sealed module. It's reasonably weatherproof, and you can remove that with 6 screws. There's 4 on the front and 2 underneath, and it takes about 30 seconds to a minute to undo those screws and take the front of the camera off, and then you could put another one on. The whole of this body is weather sealed. Once you've taken the front off, your cooling fan sits in here, and you can pull that out with your fingers to clean it. It's really easy. And you just slide it back in again, put it back together. And yes, you can do it in the field. This is not something that I have to do in a lab or in a clean room or anything else, because the body of the camera, even when the front has been removed, is still reasonably weatherproof. You can't get at the electronics once the front's off. It's designed to be taken apart to do that. It's designed so that you can clean the fan, designed so you can swap the sensor over. We've done it in quite a few workshops. It scares the hell out of people. It's quite fun. We did one workshop the other day, and we started the workshop with the camera in bits and then put it back together again. Because you can. Why not? Any more questions? Yes, sir. It shares similarities in that, I mean, one of the things with Apple ProRes RAW and both XOCN is the way that they're designed. They're very lightweight in post-production. And this is a really key thing. So traditionally, RAW cameras have used things like Cinema DNG and stuff like that to compress the RAW. And they require huge amounts of processing power to work with. I can't manage Cinema DNG on my laptop. It just doesn't work that way. But XOCN and Sony's RAW, I can, and also ProRes RAW, I can manage reasonably well on the laptop. So they share that commonality. But at the moment, ProRes RAW is limited to 12 bits because that's what all the cameras that work with that are restricted to, whereas this is 16-bit, and the difference is staggering between 12-bit and 16-bit. I think if my maths is right, 16 bits, 4096 shades, and this is 16,000 shades, something like that. It's a huge difference because every time you go up, in binary counting, you double the amount of information that you have. So going up from 12 to 16 is an enormous increase in the amount of information that you have. So they're different, but they have some sort of similar traits, shall we say. So there was another question.
Has anybody actually really been able to measure the 16-bit?
I don't know. It's a 16-bit file. What I would say is it doesn't matter how much you stretch it and try and pull it apart, you won't ever get it to do any banding or anything like that. The amount of information that is in those highlights. I believe it's 16-bit half float, very similar to what Aces use for their EXR files. I've never been able to sort of really find the limits of those files. There's a staggering amount of data in there. Any more questions? No, well, thank you very much for coming. I hope it was useful and informative.